So what I want to do is we'll do a welcome go around, and then I want to talk about the basic storyline, the basic elements of the story. And then I'm going to ask for some of your favorite quotes or moments from the reading. I pulled out some quotes myself and some already. And then I'd like to look at making connections to the Detroit of today. Think about how this book written about a mythical time somewhere else, in a country similar to ours. What does it look like in Detroit today? And then I have a segment I'm calling Nuggets of Knowledge on Nonviolence, where each session I'll be providing some additional content that talks about nonviolent theory or history or things like that, and then maybe a few closing thoughts before we clear out. So I thank you so much for joining us for this Dandelion Insurrection line. I'd like you to share your name, where your location is at the moment, and any affiliations that you might have in terms of groups that you're part of. I see, it looks like Craig is at the top of my list right now. So can you start with Craig and we'll go down the list. What I'd like to ask you to think about is if you could come up with a 2-word description of your initial impression of the book, like highly implausible or wonderfully creative or not so sure it's for me, like short description of your initial impression of the book after you do your intro, that would be great.
Okay.
And I'm challenging you to use just 2 words if you can. So Craig, you're at the top of the list. So I'm gonna
Okay. Hi everybody. I recognize a couple names and most of them are new to me. My name is Craig Barton and I'm located in suburbia, Rochester Hills, Michigan. And affiliation, I'm enrolled in the graduate certificate program and looking forward to getting complete with that, although there's no rush on my part. So it's been in 2 years now and maybe another year or more, and that's okay. I won't say too much. 2-word description, my initial impression of the book, which I read probably about a year ago and still is with me, is that it's scary close.
Scary close. Okay, thank you. So I see Daniela's next on my list. So Daniela, can you give us your intro?
Okay, so it is today that I began to read the book. So it's not that I passed the most part of it, but I would say that is an amazing one. Since the first pages I saw that I was totally into it. It's a very interesting one, and the description and the expression in there makes me to be very involved, and I just can't wait to finish it and to see what is going to be the end of it.
So give us your name, your location, and any group.
I'm sorry, yeah. So again, my name is Daniela. Right now I am in Sterling Heights, Michigan, in my home.
And you're a Mater student.
I am a student in Master of Arts in
Dispute resolution.
Dispute resolution.
And what country are you from originally?
Originally, I am from Albania, which is a small country in the southeast of Europe, in Balkan.
Thank you. Okay, so now I see somebody that's muted, DD7811.
That's me. It's Denise.
Okay, Denise, give us your intro, please.
Okay, Denise Baselio. I'm in Commerce Township at my house. And I'm in the Graduate Certificate of Dispute Resolution. And I guess my couple word sentence or phrase would be drawing parallels to today.
Okay. Eloise, you're up.
Thank you. I'm Eloise Salif-Gale. I'm in Detroit, Michigan, at home. Affiliation, I'm a master's student in the dispute resolution program, and I'm also affiliated with a political party in Liberia or Liberian party organizing in the United States and other part of the world. Two-word description of my initial impression of the book, I think, is very instructive.
Thank you. Harriet Greenwood is next.
Hi, I'm calling from my home in Dearborn here, and I'm a member of Quaker Meeting, where I know Bill, and have had a long-term interest in nonviolence and environmental issues.
You have your Green Garage affiliation.
Yep, I'm active. I'm a resident business at Green Garage in Midtown Detroit, and also the Elmore living space and kind of small inn nearby.
Thank you. And what's your two-word description?
The thing that came to mind to me was hippie fairy tale.
Hippie fairy tale.
Hippie fairy tale.
Okay, so I see a Lenovo tablet. I wonder who that might be, if they can unmute themselves. You'd have to hover over your microphone and unmute it, or why don't we go to Tommy Martin and we can come back to Lenovo if they can get connected.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I don't hear myself. Anyway, Tommy Martin, located in Oak Park, Michigan. My affiliation is the Mater program. I'm in my last year. The two words for the book was dark and amusing.
Thank you. And Susan.
Hi, I am Susan Doherty. I am in my car between events, but I'm listening attentively, not viewing, but I am listening attentively. I'll look at lights. I'm on a headset hands-free, so that's all safe. I am a member of the of Dr. Warder's class this semester, seeking a graduate certificate in alternative dispute resolution. And two words, I would say slippery slope.
Okay. I think maybe Anitria would be the one that I couldn't identify. Anitria, are you on? Can you give us a little intro?
I am on. This is Anitria Wright. I am a MADAR student. My current location is the Palace of Auburn Hills. And
Go Pistons.
go Pistons, right? And my two-word description for the book, one is interesting but far-fetched.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So let's carry on. I think you probably know, most of you already know me, so I'm not going to get into too much of my own story.
Yeah.
So
Bill, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear. Who's this?
This is Mary.
Okay, Mary. Good. Excellent. Do you want to do a little quick introduction?
Well, I'm Mary Morris. I'm a practicing mediator in the community, and I've mentored some of the students along the way in the court system.
Wayne Mediation Center.
Yes.
Excellent. And where are you calling from?
From my home in Redford.
Excellent. We are all over the map. And do you have a two-word impression of the book?
It's a folktale that has a very strong present-day meaning.
Okay, it's a present-day folktale.
Yes.
I like it. Thank you. Is there anybody I missed that hasn't checked in yet?
Jackie.
Jackie, did you check in yet?
No. Can you hear me?
Go for it.
Jackie Lacey. I'm in Southfield, Michigan, in my home. I'm a Wayne State Mater student. My last few weeks, initial impression, I thought it was going to be very boring. I have to do a couple more words. But it's interesting. It was intriguing so far. It has been, but I've only done my like five chapters. And I
Okay.
found it kind of interesting.
Kind of interesting. That's a good. I'll go with that.
Mhm.
All right. So what I want to do is do a kind of a refresher of the story so far. Then we can talk about what's in it. So I want to amaze you with my animation skills here. I have
Mm.
a little bird that starts the first chapter. He's flying desperately. The first chapter is called Little Bird, and it reminds us about these environmental challenges that are abounding. The little bird is worried about toxic fumes, and I think the bird might actually be like one of the last of his species or her
Right.
species. And there seems to be environmental change, lots of weird weather and destruction. And for me, it sounds reasonably familiar somehow. But the little bird is flying north, hoping for a spring where things can begin to change. So chapter 2 takes us to Acadieville, the Acadians, and the chapter is called "The Man from the North." And we are. I may have to do some. Just a minute. I'm going to mute participants and then let you unmute yourself. So the Acadieville, it's an interesting group of characters that we meet that are Acadian in this chapter. There's a, I don't know if you're familiar with the Acadians as a group, but they're, I was told that they have a French, they speak French, they live on between the United States and Montreal in that region, and they have a long history of being proud French speakers even when it wasn't acceptable. And I guess it was Harriet was telling me that some Acadians moved to Louisiana, and that's where we get like Cajun music and that sort of thing. So in the early section of the book, we were in a kind of a family meeting at a cafe where the Acadians are debating some of the challenges. One of the things that they're really concerned about is the fact that the borders has been closed. And there's they have a family wedding where half of the family's on one side of the border, the other half's on the other side. I don't know if anybody in the Windsor area has ever faced that, but you know, when you have family on both sides of the border, it can be a challenge. So they're concerned. We have a few quotes later. We can look at that and hear more from them. So then, as the story unfolds, we have chapter 3, Zadie Bird Gray. We meet Zadie, Charlie Ryder, a frustrated journalist. He's a journalist that it turns out that the censorship has really closed down the ability to be a real journalist. It's like there's a lot of editing going on of his work. He pines for Zadie, the amazing young activist that he's known most of his life. And the two of them elope as a ploy to fool police who've walked in on a family meeting where politics is being discussed. They've gotten to a point where they're searching for the man from the north because he's a dissident, and they're preventing groups from having meetings larger than a certain number of people. And so the Acadian family group is pretty creative about trying to get around the authorities. So we get to chapter 4, and spring has come, and Charlie kind of reflects back on his experience of becoming a writer, where he starts to write as the man from the north, and he starts to write from his heart, and it gets shared through kind of an underground network. A clandestine news network begins to distribute these findings. They can't be mailed, so they're handed from hand to hand, and people are hiding them in the back of their Bibles, and people, I guess, are feeling kind of some hope because this man from the north is saying things that other people are thinking. But as spring arrives, there's a need for more overt action. Charlie has spent some time with Zadie's parents, who are old hippie organizers, activists, and they've been learning. He feels like his history of America has been changed because he's been learning all this stuff that he didn't know about massacres and labor issues and pollution, things that weren't part of his history book in high school. He's learning from these activists, his 80s parents, and so he feels like he feels kind of spoiled in some way because he's hoping for a better America, but he's also aware of a bad history. So then the Strategy for Life chapter, our duo moves off to the big city. They're trying to avoid the manhunt that's underway for Charlie, and poverty and desperation are everywhere. They learn that the food assistance program has been defunded because 70% of funding goes to the military. And they go and they meet up with the resistance movement, and things get tense. Arguments over strategy start going on. Sparkplug, one member, is advocating violence, while Zipper focuses on video documentary work, and Charlie's making the case for nonviolence. They're meeting in some kind of bike repair, bike shop, bike part shop, kind of like, I guess, the bicycle shop in Detroit. Then chapter 6, Zadie introduces Charlie to a restaurant where she used to work called Cafe Renault. It's located on Greenback Street in a highly gentrified and heavily guarded part of the city. And the cafe is frequented by elites. And it turns out that the night that they're there, they're noticing an unusually high number of people like the Secretary of State, the Special Forces leader, are there at the cafe, so there's a feeling something must be up. So chapter 7, we're spending the night with Aubrey, the owner of Cafe Renault. And it turns out that Aubrey is a character he's an immigrant from, I think it might have been France, who's come and he's become a world famous chef. But he has a soft spot in his heart for the poor people. So he gives an example where he was told to lock up his dumpster because people were diving and getting food out of the dumpster, and he was told to lock it, and he refused to do so. And then he met Zadie, the young free-spirited activist, and she's become kind of like a second daughter to him. And so they're at his apartment, and Charlie and Zadie learn about the self-serving plans of the 3 men in a tub that they talk about. The butcher, the banker, and the candlestick maker, I guess is what they call them. And they brace for an upcoming attack on the city's power grid that Aubrey has heard stirrings and talk about at the cafe. And there's a lot of conspiracy theory about whether it's actually terrorists that are going to do the attack or whether it's power-hungry government officials. So then we get to chapter 8. Inez Hernandez is the name of the chapter. And the food assistance program has been closed, but community organizer Inez Hernandez is not giving up. An advocate for the poor, she promotes community gardens in the city. Each year she's been getting more gardens going. Shocked by the news of the impending power outages and the security lockdowns that will surely follow, Inez uses a network of churches to help the people prepare. So Inez, her mother is a bit of a character. Her mother, I think, comes from maybe Cuba or Jamaica, and she's used to kind of working the black market. She's got connections that are, the non-official economy, kind of the unofficial economy, and she's taught Inez a few tricks about organizing. But Inez is kind of like a real woman of the people who knows about the lives of everyday folks. In chapter 9, we move out to the suburbs. Charlie and Zadie manage to get out of the city before it's completely locked down, and they pay a visit to the suburban home of Lupe Hernandez Booker, who's in a biracial relationship with Todd Booker, and they are leaders in the suburban cooperative. It's the cooperative suburban renaissance, which is, I guess, after the bankruptcies and the foreclosures. People in the suburbs weren't necessarily doing so well either. They talk about being roof rich and money poor. And so the suburban cooperative, suburban renaissance is trying to help people work together in the suburbs and overcome their isolation from each other. And then we get to chapter 10, the last section for tonight's reading, Operation Urban Evacuation. The attack on the city does happen. It actually happens on many cities around the country. The power grid is attacked, and there's curfews and lockdowns. And activists in the city and the suburbs are trying to answer this question. Can people in the suburbs and the city work together to provide safety, food, and shelter for the urban poor? And I guess the answer is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. So what I'd like to do now is ask for folks that might have a favorite moment, now that your memory is refreshed about this storyline. Are there any moments that, or quotes or sections of the story that really stood out for you that you could comment on now? I welcome your input. You'd have to unmute yourself to do it, I think.
Okay, well, I'll jump in.
Thank you, Craig.
Craig here. One of the, and this is the second time I've read the book, or am reading it for the second time, but one of the sections that jumped out to me is in chapter 5. It's on page 52, and Zadie is at that bike shop. Charlie's there, and the she's in an argument, I guess, with Sparkplug.
Okay.
And her statement is a pretty long sentence, but it goes like this. Well, first she prefaces it with, what I'm trying to say is that life has mechanisms for success. The first one is the capacity to create an idea. The second is an ability to copy a pre-existing idea. The third is being able to improve on an idea. And the last one is the capability of sharing the idea. And then she kind of says to Sparkplug, do you get it? And then Charlie comes back and says, create, copy, improve, share. And that just really stuck with me. And I don't have any comments to add on it because I'm still thinking about how well that model shows up in the things that I do in my life or am interested in. So I'm still working on that. But I was struck the second time in reading, that really jumped out for me.
I guess it speaks a little bit to the open source do-it-yourself movements that are happening, where people are sharing patterns and designs for how you make things, and they are improving things and testing them out and poking them and seeing what needs fixing. So good one. I saw Eloise, you raised a hand. Do you have a thought?
Yes, I do. I think that's the same of chapter 25, and it deals with the strategy that they would use for the insurrection. And it's on page 49. And it all happened when Charlie was trying to research the kind of plan that would be put into place.
Okay.
And he goes on, it reads like this. He says that the people must be taught that they had the right to resist tyranny and the capacity to do so non-violently. They had to dissolve the barriers of class prejudice that the power elite used to effectively segregate the populace. They had to undermine the pillars of support for corporate-controlled government through boycotts, non-cooperation, and refusal to obey orders. The police, the military had to be convinced to serve the people rather than the powerful. The Dandelion Insurrection had to be strong enough to push the current regime over when it began to topple. And finally, the movement had to develop a clear strategy for moving forward, a list of reforms, a plan for holding elections, and candidates that reflected the values of the people. I think this really drew my attention because if you're trying to do anything that you're calling for change, you have to have strategy put in place that after you have succeeded, what's next, what you're gonna do, and you find out that most revolutions sometimes they fail even in the planning stage because they don't have an after plan. People get excited for getting into a revolution because maybe they feel that oppression is so much, and the only way is to get a change. But change is not all to it. After the change, what kind of peaceful stability stability, so to speak.
Thank you. Powerful quote. Other moments, they don't have to be quotes, other moments that stood out for people or characters that you related to that you'd like to share?
This is Susan.
Hi, Susan.
I love the quote, fighting destruction with destruction leaves the whole world destroyed. I kind of felt like that was, kind of the whole point of the book, and using nonviolence and some of the imagery that they gave with, citing Gandhi and MLK and others that were nonviolent activists. And I loved the line, and I know that this is kind of in the book, throughout the book. Be kind, be connected, be unafraid. And I think that is just a great phrase because I think it just epitomizes like the nonviolence, not just the nonviolence in terms of being kind and connected with people, but I think the unafraid part is really important because when you're dealing with oppressive forces, the fear that they instill is really binding on people, right? So I feel like that be unafraid is just very important.
The quote you read about the destruction and instruction, it's like the Gandhi quote about if an eye for an eye, I'll leave the whole world blind, right?
Right.
That same idea that destruction leads to more destruction, and as opposed to reconstruction or creation.
Right. I agree.
Other moments people can relate to that they want to speak to?
Hi, this is Harriet.
Hi, Harriet.
And I'm still on kind of the same chapter, I think on page 55, where they're talking about the way starlings in a flock relate to each other and calling it murmuration.
What is that?
Yeah. That they have only a few rules, they fly forward, the leader changes at every shift in direction. Keep equidistant, don't leave your wing made out in a limb.
Yeah, I like that.
And that, just following that simple patterning, thousands of birds can operate and make beautiful things that no one could do individually.
People walking down the sidewalk in a big city. We somehow manage to pass each other, and there's a lot of cooperation going on in those moments with not a lot of talk, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like there are maybe some other rules about supporting others and being not afraid that would be part of these basic rules that we might consider.
Yeah, and the leader changing really easily. I mean, that's not common in our society.
So everybody has some leadership potential and opportunities to show it.
Right, and if you gain leadership, that's cool. If you lose leadership, it's not a big deal.
Okay, thank you. Other folks?
Well, I think one of my things that I kind of got a bond to was with Aubrey and Charlie.
Okay.
They were the night of before the power grid goes down, and they're there on the balcony and they're talking. And here's this elder statesman in his community who's talking to this younger man who's striving to be, who has been thrust upon this mantle of being a folk hero. And he's telling him that, he tells him that without love, life is not worth the pain. And it made me think about, because Aubrey identifies somewhat briefly as a gay man.
Okay.
Was, and I draw parallels with that movement and how it has mirrored the different changes that it has had to go through to become the strong movement that it is, and the lesson there in itself. And then you see the love. You see when Inez is working with her sister in the suburbs, and the neighbors start to open up their homes to the children that have been evacuated from the city, and the children are telling them the stories of the camps and things of these things that they had no knowledge of. And it's the love and the humanity that makes them open their homes where they were previously afraid, to allow this movement to start moving forward.
Very good. Very good. I think the idea of asking a young person to step up just by itself is a big thing. And having conversations between elders and younger people to make space for them to be the leaders of the future is a loving act. But there's also, this whole thing about hearing stories from people. When you start to hear people's human experience, it's easier to love them, I think, or to understand them when they begin to tell their true story, their truths. So nice one. Any other ones people have to share? Other things you relate to?
I think just quickly about the recurring control of the media and the means of communication, and how the grid attack by the terrorists was designed to demonize the resistance to the public. And I keep kind of like referring back to, this is horrible, but do we really know what the news we hear means, and is it true or is it false, and all that kind of. So just thinking about that.
So the portrayal in the news media and what does it do to us is an open question.
Right.
Good. Anybody else?
Yeah, I wanted to add something.
Tommy.
Page 56, where Charlie and Sparkplug had a debate about violence, using violence opposed to nonviolence, and Charlie stood up to Sparkplug saying we don't need violence because the Dandelion Insurrection is what happens when the heart bursts open with love, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
He calls people who use violence cowards, I think.
That's right.
He kind of calls them out.
That's right.
So it's an interesting turnaround, because many people who believe in nonviolence are considered to be the ones who are, fearful or chicken.
That's right.
He's saying, no, maybe it's the other way around. So interesting. Thank you.
And he's saying they're just like them, just like you said. They're just like the tyranny.
Good one. Anybody else? I pulled a bunch out. I was experimenting with the Kindle version of the book, so I'm going to go and show a few that I found. The family meeting, there's a lot that goes on in that the second chapter. This is the Acadian family meeting. I thought it had to do with this notion of identity and about family crosses borders. And it also speaks to the kind of the coming and going of social structures and how kind of communities can live on between many different experiences. So, keep your voices down and listen to me. Écoutez, we will get through this. Mattel, Jean-Pierre, and I have voted in every election since Truman beat Dewey. And I say politics come and go. People endure. The Acadians have been citizens of France, England, and the United States. We have survived Federalists, Populists, Whigs, Tories, Know-Nothings. You recognize any of these political parties? Democrats, Republicans alike. The English rounded us up and drove us away, but we returned. They tried to suppress our religion, but by the grace of God it remains. The Americans whipped us for speaking French, but he paused, looking around proudly. On parle français ici. I don't speak French. French is spoken here. It was their time. So what do you get out of this, this quote in terms of there seems to be a good bit going on, but are there any things that it says to you about social movements for change or about resistance?
Oops.
I'm wondering if anybody sees it as interesting. And for me, the idea that language matters is one thing. People who
Right.
want to speak their own language and are forced to give it up or not use it.
I think small groups with strong sense of self-identity have a greater chance at surviving the political fallout and changes that a society can go through, as long as they hold on to that central core of their being, their language, their food, their traditions. They can survive. They can survive intact.
Yes. So you raised the point about like a smallish group or a community that knows each other face to face and has these traditions is really an important thing. And then we get into the world of today where there's so much social media and widespread community. It's a different kind of connection. Interesting to think how things change or stay the same because of that. So, but French is spoken here is an important thing for them.
It kind of reminds me of Quebec because that's kind of how they live too.
Yeah, I guess they were related in some ways. The Acadians were a separate group, but had many relatives or similar relations with Quebec. So this quote is from that same chapter. They had been thought of as a resistance group that could be labeled as a terrorist. You think about people living in Dearborn, for instance, who want to keep their cultural language. And he said, but we aren't terrorists, Jean-Pierre exploded. Nous sommes les Acadiens. We are Acadians. We have lived in this valley for 400 years, marrying back and forth over the international border that crowned the northern tip of Maine. And then it goes into this kind of the sound of their meetings, the tones of the sisters and the uncles, and it talks about the births and the passing and the hard work and the traditions that they've been through. And it's another quote about the kind of this feeling of identity and how identity can matter beyond many other things. And when identity gets threatened, people can react. So I wanted to bring that one along. Another one I picked up on is this, the three men in the tub. I guess there's that fairy tale story about the three men in the tub, but in the book, they've changed the names a little bit. So it's the butcher, who I guess represents the military forces, the banker, which represents the financial community, and the candlestick maker would be the oil industry. Like I guess candles are made out of petroleum products or fat, and in the story, I guess that they represent some of the behind the scenes decision makers that are driving the current state of society. Is anybody willing to read the yellow part of this? Narrate this little section here.
Oh,
Can you see it?
yeah. I can give it a shot.
Thank you.
No, c'est les trois hommes de la bain. Young Matt called out. The three men in the tub. The old men wheezed and howled, slapped their knees, and roared back with laughter. Heads shook at the flippant reference to the nation powerful. The butcher at the head of the military, the banker who controlled the major banks, and the candlestick maker who ran the fossil fuel industry. The presidente elegente. was nothing more than a rubber ducky floating in their bubble bath. The women laughed until their fists, shoulders bobbed in amusement. And yet it was nothing to joke about. Just last week, a high school student had been arrested for making anti-American jokes. Humor lights the wick of dissent, it was said, and dissension ignites into terrorism. Censorship gasps the nation in a tight fist of control.
Thank you so much. So,
But
does this seem far-fetched, or does this seem familiar to us? What do people think?
I think we've seen it happen. You have to just look at the different not traders, the different people who have come and became heads of nations and taken over becoming heads of nations by doing heavy censorship, controlling the media of what people are hearing and what they're able to say. We're looking at Cuba. And how did Fidel come to rise? With his censorship over the media in Cuba, as well as the leader that was before him that he rose up against. We have nothing but to look at our own recent history at different parts of the world to identify with this passage.
Okay. I wonder about the industries that are mentioned, the military and the petroleum oil industry are really, and banking, are really driving the economy in our United States. The whole XL pipeline debate that was going on, the whole Gulf oil spill. It seems like these themes about maybe Bernie Sanders would approve of this message. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he would.
Dr. Waters, this is Susan Doherty. I felt that when I heard that and when it was just read aloud,
Yeah.
The first thing that popped into my mind was the whole crash of Wall Street from 2009 and how the control of the money and the types of investments and the mortgage industry. And I saw a movie recently about all of that topic, and I've seen some documentaries about it, and the almost incestuous relationship of the power brokers in those industries and how easily it can be manipulated without people even realizing. I thought that spoke to at least one segment of the Three Men in a Tub, right?
Yeah. So the alternative to the three men would be kind of the whole community, the voices of many, many, many people who are active and involved in their own lives and the leadership and the government. This is kind of like government reduced down to three people. It's less perhaps satisfying or safe for the masses. So this is the one about the man from the north. This is when Charlie starts to write, there's like a mythology to the mysterious author. The man from the north. The room flinched at the sound of the name. Eyes flicked northward. Blood stirred. One man crossed himself automatically. L'homme du Nord. Even the mention of the writer evoked a sweat of admiration, envy, and fear. Because of the internet censors, his articles were slipped hand to hand, smuggled across the border from Canada, taped into the back of pocket Bibles, Uncle Henry's swap-and-sells, and old farmers' almanacs. All through the winter, their wood stoves were kindled by the man's incendiary remarks. He tore apart the corporate-controlled government, decried the rising tide of militarism, and lambasted the grind of economic injustice that had held millions in a death grip. The man from the north also regaled his readers with real-life stories of courage in the face of oppression. He touched their hearts with passionate tales of kindness in a time of darkness. So at Wayne State, we have our Department of Communication, and we have a journalism program. And I think that some of the elements of the story speak to the problem when journalism gets the power of real journalism gets taken away, and we're left with something else. What do other people get from this? Some of the importance of this kind of character, this man from the North. Any thoughts about what role they might play in social movements?
Well, I think he is like a legend, and so people would tell stories about him, and that's one way his legendariness, I guess, would go on and live on beyond him.
Okay. I mean, he's doing a couple of different tasks, right? He's critiquing the current situation. He's saying something's wrong with this picture. And he's also providing stories about things that people are doing in response, or creative alternatives that are happening that maybe, are a better use of our energy. So I was interested in it because of the idea that sharing different social arrangements that are not the dominant one can be, people in power will resist it because it seems like it's dangerous, but how else do you get new ideas without them being shared and talked about and discussed? It also reminded me of the whole Apple iPhone issue right now about whether the government should have a backdoor into all of our phones or not, and this whole question about privacy versus security. Okay, I have a bunch of these quotes. I don't know. This one goes back to the strategy for life, that big session people were talking about in the bike shop there, about what strategy should they use. So a woman is frustrated with this notion about maybe a riot or a violent reaction. I keep telling you that's crazy. If riots start, soldiers will be brought in and the police will start arresting people left and right. Violent unrest is exactly what the power elite wants. They're prepared to deal with it. They expect it. It gives them an excuse to tighten the reins and use military force. The young man argued with her. The unrest will backfire on the government. They'll be blamed. No, they won't. The poor will be called the culprits like always. Well, at least people will know something is terribly wrong. So this quote for me goes to the question about the place of violent insurrection or rioting in a social change movement. I'm wondering people have any thoughts or reactions to this. I'm going to try drawing on the screen, see if I can make that work.
I mean, this is Harriet. I would agree that it would that the government is likely to just be able to get a scapegoat for a riot, and the poor are going to be called the culprits. I mean, I don't think that's an effective way to highlight a problem and bring a change. I think they've said it pretty well. Now that at least people will know something is wrong. Well, maybe not. They will blame the wrong party. They'll scapegoat some element of the poor.
Okay, thank you, Harriet.
Hello.
Craig,
All right.
here, I want to jump
Go
in
ahead,
on this.
Craig.
What comes up for me in this particular passage is I would replace the word poor by the word terrorists. I think we see that later in the book. Anyone who disagrees is labeled a terrorist or insurrectionist. And that, I guess I don't want to sound paranoid, but I have some friends that were involved in some of the Homeland Security programs and plans, and they had shared with me that even local police departments now have been trained in crowd control and containments and other scenarios to deal with potential quote-unquote terrorists. So my concern is that with the word terrorist in there, who defines what a terrorist is and for what purpose? And that's just a concern that I have.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on. This idea about idealism and love versus hate, it works, and the only thing that's going to work. Our fear and hatred isn't going to create a better world than the one their greed is working on right now. In a time of hate, Charlie quoted, love is a revolutionary act. Sparkplug kicked the back of the couch. He's not going for it. You're all a bunch of crazy idealists, he muttered, and when they march you away to your collective grave, I won't say I told you so. Sparkplug, Charlie retorted in a tone so sharp it chilled the room. Do you want to do something truly radical? Sparkplug froze. Be kind, be connected, be unafraid. This is this showdown between the two of them about whether or not there needs to be a violent edge to the insurrection, or whether nonviolence can really work. I think about the Detroit riots of '67 and all the conversations and ideas about the role that they played in change and whether they actually led to a stronger city or not. Other reactions to this quote? We've already heard some thoughts about the role of love.
I would have to agree. This is Anitria. I would have to agree with Sparkplug in that regard. Just from in terms of the book, it looks good and sounds good on paper to say that love, is the answer for, resolving and getting through the day and making the world a better place. But the reality is, it's not happening. I
Love is
can't
not winning the day.
relate. No, it's something additional. It's just not just, this big burst of love is going to change everything. And, it's just not for me. Like I said, it sounds good. And because I'm a chaplain, I want to believe that. And in some regard, I teach that and share that. But realistically, I'm battling within myself, if in fact, based on the things that are happening around us, and some of which, in the book, you kind of want to question that.
Yep. Maybe love is not enough. It may be revolutionary, but it may not be enough.
Right.
We've had Gandhi, we've had Dr. King, we've had, the Buddha, who have all, stressed for us to love each other and our fellow men, and who have gone on to found movements that created great social change out of that, being this be kind, be connected, be unafraid, love sort of theme.
Okay, we don't want to underestimate the power of love, you're saying.
No.
But to add to that, one thing when that year, if we don't research for most of the revolution, I spoke a lot of that, there were also a violent aspect to it. Like you talk about Martin Luther King, you also had a group of people that take out defense, and you had some people in that movement that armed themselves. So why people would preach love predominantly, sometimes it gets to the point that people would have to reverse to hit them when it comes to defending themselves. So I don't think love kind of preside 100%.
Okay. You're talking about some kind of a need for a stronger response than just love, or a feeling that self-defense may require more than love. These are all really important ideas. So there's this idea that the suburbs are going to have to help out. There's the mortgage crisis, and the suburban communities are kind of hurting. And so I'm going to read a little bit of this. they started using block parties and toy libraries and garden projects to begin to break down the barriers. Charlie whistled appreciatively. Suburban Renaissance resurrected the shell-shocked communities that had been reeling from foreclosure, scandals, and layoffs. The remnants of America's middle class were derisively called roof rich. They had a roof over their heads, but no food on the table. Their gas tanks guzzled their salaries, and their children went to bed hungry. At the end of the day, many of them went bottom up on their mortgages and landed back out on the street, still owing money on a house they'd never really owned. The suburban Renaissance pooled the resources of its troubled communities, offering childcare, carpools, community gardens as strategy for mitigating the expensive effects of isolation. They combated the consumer culture with connection, organized social events, and offered assistance in an old-fashioned way. The largest subversion of the dominant paradigm in American history turned out to be something as ordinary as apple pie. People helping people. So I was involved with a project with Peggy Goodwin, one of our Mater grads. She studied poverty in the suburbs. They did a report for Southfield and Oakland County and looked at the numbers of people who live in the suburbs. Turns out that just because you live in a suburb doesn't mean you have money. So, but the idea that people can cooperate with each other and make things better is a long tradition in our society, I think, if you can get past the isolation of not knowing your neighbors. So I think it's an interesting thing to be thinking about. There's also conversation in this book about privilege and about why it is that some groups are better off than others. There's Zadie's talking to Charlie. They're having this dinner in the Cafe Renault. This really expensive food that and people are, and she's mad because she says, when I hear the wealthy politicians blathering on about pull yourself up by your bootstraps, I just get shaking mad. What world are they living in? Nobody has bootstraps anymore. Our shoes are all made in sweatshops in China. The wealthy claim to be self-made success stories, but that's like saying Wilt Chamberlain's height had nothing to do with his basketball prowess. They've got inheritances, tax loopholes, private school educations, job opportunities, trust funds, insider information, investments, startup money, financial backers. Not all born equal in these things, Charlie, not in America. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's how it goes in America. So she's ticked. She's mad. And she's saying that.
I have to say, I agree with her.
Okay. What do you hear her saying? What's the main essence of it?
The fact that, I'm sorry, I had to unmute.
Yep.
The fact that, it is, I agree with the fact that the rich seem to get richer and the poor get poorer, and there aren't there's this expectation or just a general view of how the more fortunate view the less fortunate, as if they're not trying to some degree, and they're not they somehow like being in the position that they're in, and so they stay there. Well, they don't have the same opportunities or the same, it's just different. And so it's a lot to kind of explain in reference to this. But I definitely agree with this statement. It's very generalized, but I'm not saying that I agree completely, but I definitely agree to some degree.
The Quaker meeting that Harriet's part of, they've been talking about the idea of white privilege and the notion that you may feel like you're a good person like myself, and that I've earned everything that I've got, but there may be a whole list of things that I have kind of given to me by my parents having both had college educations before me, having a variety of things that give me a leg up or a step ahead from other people.
I agree.
And so the idea that I look down on somebody because they don't have what I have, or because they haven't tried hard enough, there may be another explanation, and she's giving it here.
Yeah.
Good. I'm noticing the time. I want to make sure we get to some more, some of the nuggets of nonviolence. This slide, this quote talked about the suburban renaissance beginning to kind of develop their own victory gardens. They've turned the front lawns of suburban homes into food-producing spaces. And Charlie's feeling a moment of victory when the power comes back on and there's been an evacuation of people from the city. And he says, sensible rationalizations and conspiracy theories vied with each other. Charlie slung his spade up onto his shoulder. It didn't matter much to him. The man from the north understood. True power lay within people. The authorities had tried to grab hold of it, but it had slipped from their grasp, refused to be rounded up, snuck out of the city, knocked on doors, opened hearts, and survived. Charlie left the patch of yellow flowers in front of him undisturbed. Up and down the street, the lawns had been turned over by crisis and change, and the indomitable dandelions endured. This picture on the left side here is a picture of a victory garden in Drummondville, Quebec, that became famous because the zoning department for Drummondville had told them they weren't allowed to grow vegetables in their front yard. And it became kind of an internet sensation where people were rooting for the front yard garden to have a chance, and they won. So this is their kind of their front yard garden. I guess compared to expensive lawn, like big lawns that take a lot of watering and maybe pesticides, this is considered a better alternative for many people. Okay, so I'm looking for your ideas about connections to the Detroit of today or the North America of today. What are some of the things in this book, which is a fictional book, do you think can connect to where we are in Detroit today? Are there any connections that you can make for us? Any volunteers?
Well, there's certainly a lot going on with urban gardening in Detroit and a lot of disconnection in the suburbs.
Yes. The place where you are, the Green Garage, has a garden on its roof.
Right. Right. But it's very hard. I mean, the garden that you pictured in Drummondville is a huge amount of work. And it's either got a lot of fertilizer or very talented organic gardeners. I mean, those things are not easy to create. They're so beautiful.
Okay. Gardening is not just free food. It takes labor.
Yeah.
Other connections from the readings that, from the book so far that you think are relevant to today?
Well, for certain, is not so much in Rochester Hills, but for certain in Detroit, the fact that love above violence is not the answer. I mean, it might be the answer, but that's not what's happening in Detroit right now. It's complete violence. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but for me, I don't live in Detroit, but from what I have observed and read and catch on the news, it's total chaos. And, you know, it has a lot to do with class. And, but some of it isn't, because there's lots of corruption also in the government. But, you know, it's still, it's kind of crazy.
What if we were to say that every time a volunteer mediator mediates, that's an act of love? Maybe it's not all, not all bad. Other connections.
I would like to say our close connection to Canada. Just we're right there. So
we know about living at a border.
Yes, there you go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
This is Dwight here. Can you hear me?
Dwight, hey, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Doing fine. I'm sitting here listening. One of the things that's quietly kept, but very much is real in Detroit, is the diversity.
Diversity.
Yeah, Detroit's a African American city. Well, you need to get around and look and see what's going on. Look out in Southwest Detroit. I grew up out in Southwest Detroit, and it's been very diverse with the Hispanic community, East European, and Appalachian white, and African American, just to name a few. And then over in the Northeast section, I'm not sure how much is still there, but there was the Hmong community over there.
Yep.
And then along 7 Mile, there's the Arabic community, mostly Chaldean, I believe.
Okay.
There's a lot of diversity in Detroit, but it's an African American city. And then when you see what's going on downtown, well, that's a whole different piece in terms of the gentrification and so on. But
so the idea of
Yeah.
identity mattering can still be true for these different communities that share a language or a culture, but they still live side by side with other groups that are different.
Yeah.
Good one.
I'm going to jump in, Bill, if I could.
Go ahead, Craig.
Okay, since Rochester Hills was mentioned, and that's where I live, South Rochester Hills, just want to comment real briefly about if I look out our windows here to maybe 15 houses in a middle-class suburb, I would say that I'm white Caucasian, of course, that of 15, only 3, maybe 4 homes are people who look like me. The rest are Mexican, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Chaldean. And so I think that diversity exists beyond just Detroit. I think it exists in the suburbs more and more so. My stepdaughter lives about 4 miles away on the edge of Rochester Hills, and that proportion there is even higher in terms of diversity. So the plus about that in terms of the book would be connection through diverse groups isn't limited just to the city. It reaches out the potential into suburbs as well. So that kind of makes at least a possibility of that kind of communication and connection.
Okay.
The other thing that I think we need to put on this list here has to do with the diversity or income inequity. And that is just huge. I mean, it's kind of like the further out you go, the higher, the bigger the houses are, and the more, monies are spent as compared to Detroit as an epicenter for the other end of the scale.
So if we look at the Midtown and housing rental charges to live in Midtown now, rents are really going up. And the people who are living in Midtown are, of a higher class if they can afford to live there. And I wonder if it's going to look like Greenback Street or whatever it's green. Is it Greenback's the name of that street in the story? The question of gentrification comes up. During the power outage, Greenback Street had its lights stay on, right? So, good points there, Craig. Thank you.
Can I add that? Can I add something?
Hello.
Yeah, I think we can connect certain things in the book, like the termination of social services from Detroit. Like,
Social services are diminishing.
yeah, and we go to some institutional, upliftment, like libraries and all being closed. All that.
Good one.
Yeah.
We talk about diversity, but I think there's still a great deal of division.
Okay.
And we're still divided.
Fear is still alive.
Yes.
Division. You look at the spirit of Detroit there. He looks so hopeful, though, doesn't he? Well, okay, so I'm going to move on. I think I erased I hope will come back when I move. I want to talk to about nuggets of nonviolence. You see my gold nugget here? I had the advantage of having an undergraduate class all about the history of nonviolence, and I've studied it since then. And students in the class will know that there's also a study guide that comes with the book. It's a separate book that provides some kind of backstory on different topics related to nonviolence. So I'm picking up on the material starting on page 6 in the study guide to talk about some myths about nonviolent action that we might want to consider as we go forward. The first myth is that nonviolence doesn't work. There's been some really powerful research. Erica Chenoweth and her partner studied nonviolent campaigns. We're going to hear a quote from them in an audio interview with them in just a minute. But it turns out that nonviolence works better than violence in many situations where you're trying to get rid of occupying force or throw out a dictator in violence. Nonviolence is passive and cowardly. It turns out that being a nonviolent activist requires a great deal of strength of character and determination. I think it was Gandhi that talked about the importance of preparation, where people were trained in nonviolent, kind of turning the other cheek doesn't come naturally. You have to learn how to kind of not provide a violent response that gives justification to the other side to use their big weapons on you. So the idea that nonviolence is passive and cowardly turns out that you have to be very brave to be a nonviolent activist for a variety of reasons. Nonviolence works by melting the heart of the oppressor. The idea being that it somehow brings out the inner good in them, and they then change their ways. This maybe happens in a small percentage of cases, but most of the time, nonviolence works because it's a people's movement with lots of participation, where the oppressor loses the support of the bureaucrats in the society that are making the systems run. The teachers are no longer going along with his agenda or her agenda. And so you'd like the oppressor to have a change moment, a moment of clarity, but you don't count on it or expect it. The interesting thing that Gandhi did was he always gave the oppressor a nonviolent way out, like a face-saving exit strategy. He didn't believe in humiliation as a strategy, unlike people like Saul Alinsky, an activist who said, we'll do whatever we need to make the powerful feel uncomfortable. Humiliation is fine. Where Gandhi came at it from a different direction. Throwing the British out of India took him 21 years. So he was in for the long game. Nonviolent works because people are fundamentally good. You can agree or disagree with that. Nonviolence still seems to work whether or not you believe that people have an inherent goodness. Nonviolence is a spiritual cult. You have to be a saint to use it. It turns out that Gene Sharp, who's the famous scholar of nonviolence, says that nonviolence works because people are stubborn. They don't like to be told what to do by powerful people. And when they get together and they all are stubborn together, big things can happen. So it turns out that saintlyhood is not the characteristic, but more stubbornness is the one that matters. Nonviolence does not work against totalitarian regimes. It does work. We have many examples now in history of nonviolence working against dictators. We know that sometimes they are more casualty, more costly to throw somebody out, but they are also more effective. We're going to hear more about that in the interview in just a minute. Nonviolence means your opponents won't use violence. The idea that if you commit to nonviolence, the other side's not going to be nasty doesn't work. That is not true. You may have to prepare yourself for being in the face of danger and preparing yourself for that. And finally, nonviolence can be only used for good causes. People who are on the side of justice and peace like to think of their causes as the right causes. But there are other groups with alternate philosophies that you don't agree with that also can use nonviolence. So there are, if you believe in a woman's right to choose, and then you see anti-abortion activists using nonviolent tactics, that might really frustrate you. But I guess you could say it's better if we end up in a world where everybody's fighting nonviolently for causes they believe in, that maybe that's a step forward from where we are now. But the idea that nonviolence is on the side of good and values that you support is not necessarily the case. So what I wanted to do was to share an audio clip here. I hope this is going to work. I'm not sure. Can you hear it?
No.
Can you hear it? No, you cannot
No.
hear it.
No.
Okay. Darn it. I'm going to go back just a minute. I don't know how I'm going to get this audio to play for you. I'll see if I can fix this somehow. Maybe I can do, I don't know what my plan is here.
Bill, consider playing it into your microphone.
Okay. My microphone, all right, let's see if I can do that. Let's take a second here. Do you hear anything?
Democracy in Hong Kong. But researcher Maria Stephan admits that recent events have called into question whether such
Yes.
Obviously, looking around the world today, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iraq, parts of Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, it's hard to be optimistic about civil resistance having a hopeful future. But I actually think people are also looking at what is happening in these places and thinking to themselves, there has to be a better way.
a better way is what led Stephan and her colleague Erica Chenoweth to study more than 300 cases of resistance from the 2000s to answer one central question: are violent rebellions more effective than non-violent? Here's our colleague Stephen speak about the findings.
When you look back through history, what was the difference in the results between violent tactics and non-violent tactics?
Well, when we drilled down into the data, we found that the nonviolent campaigns tend to be 11 times larger than the violent ones. People power is really the main story here. When very large and diverse sectors of society withdraw their attention from the opponent government, it's extremely difficult for that government to maintain its hold on control. And the reason is because every power holder is 100% reliant on the cooperation, obedience, and help of people that reside in its pillars of support: the security forces, the state media, religious authorities, educational elites, business and economic elites, and civilian bureaucrats. One of the best kind of concrete examples of how this plays out comes from an anecdote from Serbia, where a nonviolent movement removed Slobodan Milosevic from power in October of 2000. In the last stages of that campaign, where hundreds of thousands of people were engaging in a demonstration in Belgrade, the police were ordered to shoot live ammunition into the crowd indiscriminately. And they just stood there in silence. They didn't retreat, they didn't join into the protest, but they didn't follow the order. When one of them was asked later why he refused to shoot, he said, "I was afraid my kids would be in the crowd."
You've described how a nonviolent uprising has broader participation, more people, sheer numbers of people. You also write about the types of people who get involved.
Right. So, I mean, nonviolent movements tend to attract the participation of men and women, rich, poor, blue collar, white collar, workers, religious figures, mainly because there are so many different tactics available to groups that engage in civil resistance. In general, the barriers to participation are lower. So we often see, women being on the front lines of movements. In Tunisia, the people power movement that ousted Ben Ali, the trade unions played a critical role in launching labor strikes, and then they played a very important role in the peace building that followed. And I think that's an important point to make, that transitions that are driven by active nonviolent means tend to result in societies that are both more democratic and that are less likely to result in civil war after the fact. So they're more peaceful societies as well.
Okay, so Maria Stefan, why does an armed rebellion not put that same kind of pressure on an authoritarian government?
Right, so when you use armed means and violence, it's very hard to co-opt or prompt loyalty shifts within those pillars of support, whether it's security forces or others. And it sort of encourages an even more massive crackdown on the opposition.
I'm thinking of something that I heard traveling in Syria last year. I was talking with a doctor who was willing to say out loud that he had no love at all for Bashar al-Assad. But having said that, he said, these rebels are destroying the country. That's the kind of thing you're talking about. That's the attitude shift that may take place when it becomes an armed rebellion.
Right. So I would say, since I worked with some very brave and courageous Syrians for over a year while with the State Department, and can say that I have great respect for their ability to maintain a nonviolent posture for about 8 or 9 months against this type of regime. So I understand where that doctor is coming from. It's also pretty evident why Syrians took up arms against this type of regime. But the problem with it is that once armed insurgency became the prevailing form of resistance against the Assad regime, this significantly decreased the level of participation. It caused sort of moderate voices, fence sitters, to not be overwhelmingly supportive of the opposition. And then the resistance was very largely reliant on outside forces. So they needed weapons, training, money, which, you know, as we've seen, has been not as forthcoming as they would have hoped.
I'm curious, since your findings have been published, what reaction you've received specifically from military officers. Erica Chenoweth?
Military officers are surprisingly receptive to the findings. They find it intuitive. They tend to like the strategic framework, especially. They ask tough questions, of course, but are generally pretty convinced by the findings.
Likewise. So I would say that one of the prevailing views amongst military colleagues is that, well, you know what, if local people, if the local communities in these countries are able to bring about serious political change themselves, and we don't have to send our guys and women into harm's way, isn't that preferable? Well, of course it is.
What were some of the tough questions you mentioned?
Well, it takes less than 5 Q&As usually to get to the Hitler question, which is, would nonviolent resistance have worked against Hitler? There are these questions about whether there are types of regimes that nonviolent resistance can't work against, and so forth. And we don't exactly know. We know that there were pockets of nonviolent resistance against Hitler's occupations in various places, and they honestly fared better on local levels than any of the partisan or armed uprisings did around Europe, that is for sure. But I think that we don't yet have a really strong set of empirical findings that suggest that there are places in the world that nonviolent resistance is totally impossible.
Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan, thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow. Did you get any of that? You did. Excellent. Their study, I mentioned their names here on the slide, and then Erica has a website you can go to. I'm sorry to go through this again. I'm losing control of my swiping here. Okay. I wanted to show you this before we wrap up. My colleagues at Swarthmore, maybe you've heard of Swarthmore, it's near Philadelphia, it's a Quaker college. They've developed a database of nonviolent actions around the world. You can see this map that I have highlighted here of the records in their database show people power being used all over the place. They were cheering when they added their 1,000th nonviolent campaign in there. They've been using undergraduate sweat labor. Their class in nonviolence students help add to the case database. And the thing that's exciting about it is that it's open source, it's shared widely, and it has information about the outcomes, how long the struggles took, who were the primary parties, what were their goals met. So it's a very rich data set for beginning to look at the kinds of campaigns that work or don't work. I also have a link here I built a timeline of, I'll see if I can swing it open here on the iPad, where I put these timeline of the data from Swarthmore into a website where you can go through history through time and look at the different movements. Like there's an entry for 1619 in the United States and Virginia where the nonviolence was used. So I've got this kind of view that you can see of a nonviolent resistance. Okay. There's also, I wanted to mention the U.S. Institute for Peace. Their global campus has now developed a really great course on civil resistance and the dynamics of nonviolent movements that they ran it once in the open. They're waiting to do it again. It's filled with really good videos, a lot of good videos from experts in the field talking about the movement. So there's a lot of websites now that provide educational materials related to nonviolence and action. And so it's a good time to be a scholar. So that's, we're getting to the top of the hour. Coming up next week on Wednesday, April 6th at 7:30, I'm asking people to do another kind of 10-chapter chunk, chapters 11 through 22, and we'll dig a little deeper into the Dandelion Insurrection. I wanted to invite any closing thoughts that people might have before we wrap up. Or something that you're curious to learn more about would be a good idea. Any closing comments? I'm going to go down the list. Craig, have you got any closing thoughts?
Again, thank you very much for hosting this, and I'll email you separately because you mentioned it fits into the program somehow, and I don't know what that means or how that works, but I'm happy to be here, and I want to thank you again for well, I can see all the work you do in setting this up, and I guess I did have a question whether how we might access these slides. Are they on Pearl trees or?
I'd like to send them out to people who registered for the discussion. So I'll print them. I'm not quite sure how my bird timeline is going to work with all the pop-up bubbles. I don't know if we'll be able to read each bubble or not, so I have to figure that out. Daniela, any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank each one about, it's very interesting to bring thoughts about the book. I find the book like a very interesting one, and it's good that we went through some paragraphs that I had already read, and it was interesting the way we approached ideas and thoughts about it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And it looks like Anitria might be next on my list. Any closing thoughts, Anitria? I think maybe she's using the chat. Dwight, how about you? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you.
Okay. When I first started reading the book, I was wondering, okay, all right, what is this? Okay. Then it started to dawn on me what was going on here about the whole concept of conflict resolution, mediation, etc., handling problems without violence, being able to sit down and talk and sharing ideas, and people rising up to say, this is not the way to handle it. The nonviolent way is the way to handle it. And you can argue back and forth, just like, who was it, Sparky? Sparky thought it was crazy. Well, Sparky will come around and just keep working at it. I like it. This was a very, very is, because I don't want to let you know that I finished reading it, but
we're going to keep going.
Oh, yes, that's what we will. Very good. Glad you mentioned this. Glad you include.
Yeah, you missed the introductions. Dwight is a community mediator. He's been coming to some of our Harper Woods high school sessions, and now he's online, making it happen.
Okay.
Thank you. Eloise, any thoughts?
Yes, sir. I mean, I enjoyed reading the chapters that I kind of ran through and didn't even know that I was through with chapter 10. My serious concern was that, and I think the book did raise the issue that the war has become so militarized because of terrorism. So it's kind of puts you in the place that whether you oppress or not, you have so much fear from terrorism that a lot of people don't even want to assemble in the street peacefully because people could be labeled as terrorists or threat to national security, or because the gathering can be infiltrated by terrorists. And so I would like to see if the book would address that. How do people rise a nonviolent way in the more militarized world now for the fear of terrorism?
Thank you. Harriet. I don't know if Harriet's, I don't see her mic. There's some people using the chat, but I don't have it open, so I'm missing your comments. I'm sorry about that. Jackie, any closing thoughts?
No, I thought this was interesting. I wasn't sure how it was going to go for certain, and if I would, enjoy.
If I was going to crash and burn.
But like I said, the book is, like I said, what I've read, it's intrigued my interest. So I'll continue to read and see you next session.
Great, thank you. Tommy.
Oh yeah, when you first read the first chapter of the book, I didn't know which direction it was going to go like the white, and it was interesting at first. Then I seen that the direction is all about nonviolence and doing everything civil. So I thought it was interesting, and being a part of this whole online chat is new to me. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do this.
Thanks. And it looks like Susan's the last on the list if she's not driving down the freeway somewhere. Any thoughts, Susan, in wrap up?
This is Denise. It's not Susan.
Hi, Denise. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. I just wanted to kind of echo what Tommy said because I had not used this application before either, but I thought it worked really well.
Oh, good. Okay, I was hoping it was user-friendly enough that we could get started and just kind of figure it out as we go, and it looks like it's working.
Yeah, I'm on an iPad, and it works really well on an iPad. So
excellent. Okay, anybody else have closing thoughts before we wrap it up? I got to figure out how to, I'm going to stop my iPad. And I'm going to say good night to you all. Thank you for your good participation. And I look forward to seeing you next time.